Anyway, I don't know who's responsible for this, but thank you. Welcome back. It's been a red letter year for the Garden Family Jazz Studies program in a number of ways. For those of you who don't know, we had the great pleasure of hosting a longtime mentor of mine and an icon in the jazz world. We had Wynton Marsalis here working with our band this morning. And today was just kind of a micro snapshot of what the last 6 years of this journey for me has been. This is the completion of my 6th year, so I call it my senior year. Thank you. So I started here in the fall of 2019, and then COVID happened. So I feel like I kind of got a reset to about 3 years in, but I could not be prouder of our faculty and our staff and the way that they care for our students and the way our students have excelled. But we can't do any of that without you as the parents of these students who are driving them to and from school, sometimes hundreds of miles every week. So students, will you give your mom and dad a round of applause? And while I'm at it, do your chores without being asked, please. A couple weeks ago, we had the privilege of performing several times in New York City as part of the 30th annual, essentially, Ellington competition. This year, the festival, due to the 30th year, they expanded the program. Normally it's 15 ensembles and it's a nationwide contest and festival. This year it was 30 bands and groups from all over the world came. So we were one of those 30 bands that was honored to play. We played at a jazz club in New York City, and then we played twice at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and they had the best performances they've had all year long. So a round of applause for them. If you're ever in New York, you should definitely make it a landmark to go and visit Jazz at Lincoln Center. It's a special place for a number of reasons, but to us, we know it as something else. We call it the House of Swing! Say it again. House of Swing! And what did we do when we were there? Swing! And what are we going to do now? Swing! entitled Elegy for a Man. It was originally entitled Elegy for a Clarinet. This is going to feature Emmett Altine in an extended piano solo up front. I want to tell a quick story, actually. We were in New York. We made it through the first round of the competition to the semifinals, and one of the rules is that we had to change one of the compositions that we played. And as is the challenge, you know, we had to figure out who's going to solo on what, etc. And what it meant was that one of Emmett's solos was going to disappear. And so the morning of the performance, or was it the night before? It was at 10 p.m. You know, all of his children were in bed, of course, by 10 p.m. on this trip in New York. So I texted Emmett and I said, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you play a piano intro before we start the tune tomorrow? And the level of trust that we can have with these kids is unreal. Like, they're on the biggest stage of jazz in the world. And I text how old are you? 15-year-old kid, and saying, hey, you know, we're playing for Wynton Marsalis and a bunch of other people tomorrow, and, you know, some of the best bands in the world. Why don't you play an impromptu solo in front that you've never done before? And he said, okay, sure. And he nailed it. He nailed it. So, this is Elegy for a Man by the great Jerry Mulligan.
Shelf tenor saxophone. On trumpet, Alan Graham and Pedro Pedrosa.
One of the unsung heroes of a big band is the guitar player that Wynton hit on earlier this morning, because they're often felt but not heard. We are grateful to have two wonderful guitar players. This next tune was written by jazz guitar great Pat Metheny. This is a special composition that was arranged by Bob Curnow for a record that they did about 20 years ago. This is going to feature not Elliot, but Oliver Shirota. I always call him Elliot. Oliver Shirota on guitar. This is Neon. we're going to feature someone who is known for playing trumpet in our ensemble, but is also a fantastic vocalist. Would you welcome Miri Eisenberg to come and sing? I also want to note Mr. Brown's band played a different version of Caravan earlier, and he asked me, are we worried about this? And I said, no, the two versions are so different that I think they're going to highlight our strengths, and Miri is certainly one of those. So, here we go. This portion of the program is brought to you by Energizer.
The mystery of their fate.
Mary Eisenberg. In the early 1920s, the age is known as the Jazz Age. There was a young Jewish composer from New York City who wrote a bunch of music, hundreds and hundreds of songs that became part of American folklore. And he became so well known that he was commissioned to write the first classical piece, the first jazz piece for a classical orchestra called Rhapsody in Blue. And about 30 years after that, a young African-American pianist by the name of Billy Strayhorn, who was closely tied with the Duke Ellington Orchestra for many years, took the original version and reorchestrated it. And so this is Billy Strayhorn's version of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. This is going to feature a number of people: Leighton Uther on the bass saxophone, Katie Shinogi on the clarinet, Ali Moline on muted trumpet, Sam Chun again on tenor, and Sharon Imaoka on piano. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to share the stage with this ensemble this year. We have one more tune for you before we roll out all of our awards. How about it for this amazing band? I'm partial to the trumpet, of course, so this last one is going to feature two of our trumpet stars, Miri Eisenberg and Ali Moline, playing Portrait of Louis Armstrong.
And that was an album by Mary Eisenberg. All right. We have a lot of awards to get to, so.